Let's talk about Saudi Arabia's strategy in Yemen. In 2022, Saudi Arabia established the Presidential Leadership Council, the PLC, that brought together key members of the STC and Yemen government to counter the threat of Ansar Allah. Yet only 1 year later, Saudi Arabia entered into bilateral negotiations with Ansar Allah that excluded the PLC, and then a year later established the Hadramaut National Council that is undermining STC's efforts for succession. So what is Saudi Arabia's strategy for exiting the conflict and securing their territory? We find their strategy can be summarised along two key pathways. The first is a political solution. This began with the Riyadh Agreement, which was aimed at ending the power struggle over the control of South Yemen and led to the formation of a unity Presidential Leadership Council government that represents both north and southern regions equally. The agreement emphasises the importance of intra-Yemeni dialogue as crucial to achieving a sustainable political settlement and bringing stability to Yemen. Greater stability will create the conditions for Saudi Arabia to exit the conflict, allowing them to divert resources to domestic investment and attract further investment from China. The second is to reduce the military threat of Ansar Allah. Tensions on the Saudi-Yemen border still remain high, and in recent years, Ansar Allah have repeatedly targeted Saudi cities and their oil installations. And therefore, for Saudi to exit the conflict and reduce their military presence, they will need to reduce the threat of Ansar Allah. So let's have a look at their strategies in more detail. Let's begin with Saudi Arabia's strategy for achieving intra-Yemen dialogue and greater stability. Despite being signatories to the Riyadh Agreement, STC forces continue to pursue their aims of declaring a southern independent state with the backing of UAE. This is weakening the PLC's ability to provide a cohesive force to counter the Ansar Allah threat and undermining efforts for intra-Yemen dialogue. In response, Saudi Arabia continued to support the deployment of armed forces along STC front lines to prevent STC from further expanding and capturing more revenue-generating territory. Saudi Arabia have also established administrative bodies in the south in Hadramaut and Adam. These bodies are aimed at giving local elites greater control over the management of the revenue streams generated in their governorates and fiscal expenditure, but within a unified state framework. This move limits the ability of STC to extract revenues from these areas for their own gains, reducing their capacity to sustain their future independently. For Saudi Arabia, this can lead to a reinforcing cycle of behaviour. As STC reduce their capacity to sustain their future, they are incentivized to enter into dialogue that can stabilise Yemen. This will allow Saudi Arabia to reduce their military presence whilst providing support to a unified framework. However, this cycle still risks being disrupted. If UAE continue to support STC, they will continue to have the capacity to expand their territorial and administrative control, which will again put them into direct conflict with Saudi-backed forces. So let's explore Saudi Arabia's strategy for securing their border and stopping attacks by Ansar Allah. To achieve this, Saudi Arabia have entered into ceasefire negotiations with them. The main discussion points in the negotiations are the cessation of violence, and in return, improving Ansar Allah's access to trade routes such as airports and ports, as well as providing fiscal support to pay civil servants' salaries under Ansar Allah control. For Saudi Arabia, this could provide a reinforcing cycle of behaviour, whereby as Ansar Allah increase their financial capacity through greater control of trade, they become more invested in stability in Yemen, and therefore have reduced incentive to expand their control of strategic areas and increased incentive to enter into intra-Yemen dialogue. This can eventually lead to a power sharing agreement with STC and IRG parties. This cycle of behaviour risks disruption if Ansar Allah use their increased financial capacity to purchase more arms from Iran and hence increase their ability to expand control of more territory. However, the cooperation agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by China, does provide a counterweight to this potential risk, whereby Saudi Arabia are putting pressure on Iran to reduce their military support to Ansar Allah. So what does this all mean for the prospects of peace? From Saudi Arabia's perspective, a key element of their strategy is to incentivize both Ansar Allah and STC to engage in intra-Yemen dialogue. However, key to achieving this strategy is limiting the military support from Iran and UAE, respectively, which will limit their capacity to capture more territory, and thus incentivizing STC and Ansar Allah to enter into dialogue that secures their existing territorial footholds. Prompting the question, how much leverage does Saudi Arabia have over Iran and UAE to persuade them to reduce their support? If Saudi Arabia have limited leverage, does this mean the chances of intra-Yemen dialogue are low and the return to violence becomes higher? So, what can this tell us about how recent events on the Red Sea are complicating the mediation space? Recently, the UN Special Envoy declared that the continued escalation in the Red Sea that has led to US airstrikes is complicating the UN peace roadmap. So let's explore these complications. So far, Saudi Arabia has refrained from commenting on the airstrikes or condemning Ansar Allah, despite being an ally of the US and the disruptions affecting their trade. Given that key to Saudi Arabia's strategy is reaching a political settlement with Ansar Allah, and that Ansar Allah still have the capacity to expand their control as well as threaten Saudi's territory, this means Saudi Arabia now have to manage, on one hand, the need for a secure Red Sea with Ansar Allah's demands for a ceasefire in Gaza, or they run the risk of Ansar Allah breaking off negotiations and undermining any hopes of intra-Yemen dialogue. So, over to you. To help us delve deeper into these questions, we need to hear from you. How long can Saudi extend this strategy of pushing STC and Ansar Allah towards dialogue? Do you think this strategy is sufficient to incentivize STC and Ansar Allah? What other challenges do we need to consider? Post comments below or email us with your perspectives at yemenpeace@dialectic.org, or visit us at Patreon Yemen Peace Initiative, where you can join our community of experts in Yemen. The link is below.